Some can see you and some, I'm not sure what it is. My camera is on my side. Good morning, students. Once again, as I said, this is not a sleepy lecture. Please take off your blankets, sit up straight. I need your full attention. I want you to participate in this lecture this morning. And before I start with my lecture, what I want to do is I'm going to share my presentation with you. And then I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues in the audience in the meeting room today. There is Professor Mollema, as usual. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Joshua. Last week, I incorrectly called him Mr. He's actually an admitted advocate of the High Court, and he'll be taking you through your next lectures from next week. So welcome, Joshua. And there is a special person in the audience today. Let me welcome Professor Fawzia Kassim. So Professor Kassim, this one slide is especially for you. So welcome team, welcome Professor Kassim, welcome Professor Mollema, Advocate Commander, and welcome students. I hope you are as happy to be in this lecture as my PowerPoint person here. Okay, what I'm going to do then now is I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to start this lecture. Is everything in order on your side? Just a few thumbs up so I know that I'm not speaking to having a monologue on my side. Perfect, thank you. I'm going off camera. I'm going to switch that off. Perfect. And I'm going to do a full screen presentation. Fawzia, I hope you enjoyed that, hey? Right, that's so you are in the criminal law specific crimes, CRW2602. For those of you who are a little bit confused, yesterday was the CRW2601 lecture. It was a very interesting lecture by Professor Mollema and Mr. Ramosa. For those of you who are registered for both, as I told you previously, CRW2602 presupposes knowledge from the CRW2601. So it's very important that if you did not attend yesterday's lecture for general principles of criminal law, that you get a copy of the video or of the recording. Students, as I always do, there's the recap for the first week. What we've done is we did this crimes against the state, we did terrorism and public violence. Week 2, we did crimes against the administration of justice, and it was quite a lengthy lecture, and a lot of you put up with the connectivity issues that we were having on our side, but thank you for that and thank you for your patience. Hopefully today we are not blessed with the load shedding because we don't have it on our schedule, but you never know. But as I said previously, if there is an issue, just breathe in, breathe out, and wait for me to connect. So last week we did perjury at common law, we did statutory perjury, we did defeating or obstructing the course of justice, and contempt of court. Now this week is also a little bit of a heavy load. So we are doing this week crimes against the public welfare. The crimes against the public welfare that we are going to be studying is corruption, extortion, drug offenses, unlawful possession of firearms or ammunition, and road traffic offenses. Now students, don't stress, don't worry. I'm well aware that some of us have the attention span of a goldfish, which is about 30 seconds. Multiply that in human terms, we'll have 40 seconds of attention span. But unfortunately, we're still going to have to do about half an hour of the lecture. But I'm not going to be doing all of the work or all of the units, study units for crimes against the public welfare. So what we are going to be doing, we're doing this a little bit differently this week. This week, we're going to have part 1 and a part 2. So the part 1 we will be discussing in today's lecture is corruption and extortion. Now the reason, Sam, please switch off your camera. You're eating up data from our students. The crimes against the public welfare that I'm discussing today is corruption and extortion. And the reason that I've chosen to discuss corruption and extortion, and if you are one of my diligent students, once you are reading corruption and extortion, you will see that there is a area of confusion between what is corruption and what is extortion. So I thought maybe I would discuss that so I can clear any confusion. And then what I'm going to do in part 2, thank you, Joshua. He says my sound is clear. That is Advocate Kumwenda. Part 2 is a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to do on the unlawful possession of firearms, ammunition, road traffic offenses, and drug offenses. And I'll upload that on my Unisa, or I'll provide a link to these PowerPoint presentations. I had every intention of doing drug offenses. That's where you can see it's small in the bottom in part 2. But when I was doing all the work for part 1, it was too much of information in one sitting. So I hope this is going to be okay with you. The most important elements of corruption and extortion will be discussed here. Now, as I told you, I always like my students to understand why they are doing something, where they're coming from, and where you're going to go. So this learning outcomes for study unit 3 is you must be able to understand the requirements for certain crimes against public welfare, and you must be able to consider the possible liability. Remember, everything is an alleged and a possibility unless the person is proven guilty of the crime. So you consider the possible liability of an accused for the crimes, as I said, of corruption, extortion, use of possession of drugs, dealing in drugs, and unauthorized possession of arms or ammunition, and traffic offenses. Students, I hope that is clear and that you are all with me at the moment. There's no need for you to just take silent. You can thank you very much for the thumbs up. Now, to go on to corruption, as I said, that is the first aspect of the crime that we are going to be, thank you very much, students. The first aspect of the crime that we are going to be discussing is corruption. Now, for those of you who are a little bit confused about bribery and corruption, bribery used to be the crime that only state officials were initially charged with. So corruption was previously a common law offense known as bribery. The thing with bribery was only state officials were charged or could be charged with bribery. However, from 1992, the crime of corruption was punished in terms of the Corruption Act 94 of 1992. Okay. Then in 2004, this act was replaced, this is very important, by the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act 12 of 2004. Now, the difference between this act and the previous act is that the new act, the 2004 act, it creates a general, broad, and all-encompassing offense of corruption. Now, you remember when I told you previously only state officials could be charged with corruption? In terms of the new act, persons like agents or representatives in private enterprises can also be charged with corruption. Now, don't get too worried if you do not understand what an agent or a representative in a private enterprise is. We're going to go through that a little bit later on in this discussion. So there are various crimes. There are various crimes in which specific corrupt activity, sorry students, in which specific corrupt activities are criminalized. But because there are so many, we are not going to deal with that. The lecture would probably go on for days. Your study guide will go on for volumes. So what we are doing is we are only highlighting you to a few of these specific corrupt activities. But it is important, as I said, we are not skilling you only for you to write your exams and pass your exams. We also need you to know that there are other corrupt activities, etc., out there, and to know where to find it. And you can find that in your prescribed textbooks. Okay, prescribed textbook and guide and reading guide. Okay, now I'm stuck. Okay, corruption. Okay, am I back here? We are back. Right. Now, if you look in your study guide, you'll see that there is a long definition of corruption. Now, there's no I did not make a mistake with the spelling of long, because if you were, as I said, one of my diligent and good students, you would notice that there is an absolutely long definition of corruption. Like I told you for the crime of treason, where the crime of treason, the definition was too long to memorize. You don't need to memorize the definition of corruption, but it is very important that you understand what acts fall into the definition of the crime of corruption. Now, in the examination, we will not be expecting you to know the exact content of the section, because remember, I told you it is too long, but you'll need to know what acts fall into that crime of corruption. So what we have done, because we love our students so much, we have shortened the definition for you. So you will only need to memorize this shortened version of the section. I'm sure that you are all glad to see that. I could not fit the definition of of corruption in my slide, so I did not put it here. But this is what you need to, I'm kidding students, it's just that this is what I need you to know for the examination purposes, for the shortened definition of corruption. So it's anyone that accepts any gratification from any other person, or B, gives any gratification to any other person in order to act in a manner that amounts to the illegal exercise of any duties, will be guilty of the offense of corruption. Now, why I want you guys to always go through your study guide before you come here, because I want you to have some background knowledge. Otherwise, you're not going to be learning. You won't be able to understand. All of this will look alien to you, and then you are going to go back and say, oh, but I could have asked the lecturer this question, and I could have asked. This is your opportunity to interact and get the answers for what is bothering you in a live function. So that is why I always insist that you must go through the study material before you come here. Now, if you look at this shortened definition, students, you'll see that the definition basically consists of the acceptance or giving of a gratification as an inducement. Now, don't worry, I will go through some of these terminologies in the next few slides. Now, as you can see, as you already know, corruption can be committed in various ways. Now, for me to simplify it for my students, Professor Mollema and the rest of the lecturers, yes, Hope, please do what Advocate Kumwende has asked you to do. Professor Mollema has already simplified the information for us in the study guide. So the discussions on the crime usually distinguish between the two most important ways in which the offense can be committed. So this is what I need you to focus on. There are two main categories of the crime of corruption. It is corruption committed by the giver and corruption committed by the recipient. Okay, now corruption by the giver is, listen to me students, corruption by the giver, it's merely a mirror image of corruption by the recipient. Okay, what does this mean? It means that the same requirements apply to both these forms of corruption. However, certain terms used in describing the one are replaced by the other terms. For example, corruption committed by the giver will be something that the giver gives. But for the recipient, it is something that is received or an inducement. But you'll see what I mean a little later. I hope this makes sense. So we have simplified the discussions on crime of corruption, and you need to understand that there are two main categories: corruption committed by the giver and corruption committed by the recipient. Now, as we've been through this journey now 3 times this in the space of 3 weeks. You know, the definition is important for you to understand what the elements of a crime are. Otherwise, you won't know whether somebody is guilty of that specific crime. So each definition gives you the specifics that needs to be proven for a person to be found guilty of that specific crime. So if we had to go back to the definition of corruption, for example, the elements are the acceptance. Remember, this is the recipient. If it is the giver, it will be the giving of a gratification. And this is where I was talking about, students, when I said, listen to me, that some terminologies will have to be replaced. So if we are looking at the corruption committed by the giver, so the giver will make an offer, okay, and then of a gratification. So your element here, the element of an act, is the acceptance of the gratification. Now, for those of you who in the 2601 lecture yesterday, you will have heard Professor Mollema indicating to you that the term conduct is used a lot in the Sneeman textbook, and we use the element of act. Now, what we are saying here, conduct, act, it's potatoes, potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. So it's merely one word that has more, it means the same thing, but it's said in different. But however, you also need to understand, and this is what I need to tell you as well, an act can also mean an omission. or a conduct can also include an act which is a positive thing and an omission which you have failed to do something. So please remember that it is not only you doing something, it is also your failure to do something. So I hope you understand what the conduct, act, and omission actually means. It's the acceptance of the gratification in order to act in a certain way. Obviously, to act in a certain way means to act in violation of the rules or the regulations or of your position. It is an illegal way of acting. Now, unlawfulness. I will go through this as well. It's the absence of justification. It means that there is no defense for you to either be accepting or receiving that gratification or inducement. Students, I hope that makes sense. Now, the element of intention here for the crime of corruption is dolus eventualis. Now, remember, when we went through first week, second week, we spoke about dolus eventualis, we spoke about the Blade Runner. And what did I mean by a dolus eventualis? I meant the legal intention. I meant the legal intention of the perpetrator. Where the perpetrator, he objectively foresees the possibility of his act being regarded as corruption, for example, in this situation, but persists regardless of the consequences of his action. So I hope that makes sense. So these are your elements for corruption. Now, corruption by the giver and corruption by the recipient. Remember I told you they have the same elements. It's just that terminologies are going to change. Right, so corruption is committed if one party gives gratification. Now, gratification can take many forms. If you have been through your study guide, gratification can take the form of money, a promise, sexual favors, etc. So gratification is quite wide and it includes a lot of acts. And then the other person accepts it as inducement to act in a certain way. So one person is giving the gratification and the other person accepts it so that he can act in a way to the benefit of the giver. I hope that makes sense. So both parties in this sense, now remember this, I said I'm going to be doing extortion and I'm going to be doing corruption. In corruption, both parties, the giver and the recipient, commit corruption. Now, if this is why I like my students to be here from right at the beginning, because if you just join us, you'll be wondering where are these crimes of corruption and where is this crime of extortion. But the thing is, today I'm going to be dealing with the two crimes, which is corruption and extortion. So that is why I wanted you to sit up and have your thinking caps on so you can follow me. And I hope that you are following me. So the expression corruption by a giver refers to the conduct of the giver. Makes sense, eh? It makes sense to you now because I'm explaining it to you. But once you start reading, you will see how easy it is to get confused by terminology. And this is very important when you are studying for your examination or when you write an answer for your exam, to take note of who is the giver and who is the recipient. And corruption committed by a recipient is the conduct of the party who accepted it. So remember that, students. Okay. Now, we are going on to the elements. Let me take you back. You remember the elements of the acceptance of gratification, the giving of gratification. Now we are looking at the expression corruption by a giver. So remember, I'm going to be using it interchangeably because the elements for both are the same. However, the terminology will be different. Okay, so elements 1 and 2, the giving of gratification. Now, the act consists of X who is the giver, giving gratification to Y. Now, as I said, give is, okay, no, this is not as I said. Give is given a broad understanding. Now, give does not only mean to give physically, to give somebody something physically. You can give an offer that is made, or a promise, a promissory note, or an agreement. Or you can demand, ask for, seek, request, solicit in order to receive or obtain a gratification. So remember, give means more than something physical. You can give an offer, you can demand, you can request, you can solicit. It is not a requirement for the offense of corruption committed by the giver that X should have succeeded with his plan of action, meaning he gave the gratification, but he did not succeed in getting what he wants. That is not a defense for the crime of corruption to be committed. Now, the reason for this, students, is note there is no distinction between conspiracy or incitement to commit the substantive crime of corruption. So there is no. So even if you failed, the fact that whether you conspired or you incited or you attempted to commit corruption, you will be guilty of the crime of corruption. Because remember, one of the elements is, let me go back. It is the, sorry students, it is an offer. It is the making of an offer. No defense, right? No, where am I now? An offer. Am I here? I'm right here. Because as I said, the mere making of an offer already constitutes an act of corruption. Okay, so it is not necessary. Remember this now, because this is where your Celebi case is important. It is not necessary for the state to actually prove the existence of a definite agreement between your corrupter and your corruptee, the giver and the recipient. So these names are going to be used interchangeably. Nor does it need to prove the payment of a quid pro quo by the corruptee. Now, what this means, quid pro quo, students, as I mentioned last week, some Latin terms we have to know. Some Latin terms are there for us, with us till the day we die, which hopefully is not in the not too soon. And quid pro quo basically means you scratch my back, I scratch your back. You know, you do me a favor, I do you a favor. So this is where the Celebi case, the court said that you do not have to prove that there was in fact a quid pro quo agreement. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Then, no defense to the giver and the recipient. Remember, I was talking previously about no defense and of, for example, what did I say? Where the is committed gives gratification. Sorry, students, I'm looking for the I'm looking for where I said that the mere asking, or I said this one, it's the mere asking of the mere making of an offer already constitutes an act of corruption, and it is not necessary for the state to prove the existence of the definite agreement. So let's look at some defense. There's some of the defenses that can be brought up by either the corrupter or the corruptee, but which is actually no defense to the giver and the recipient. Note I'm using the terminologies interchangeably. Okay, the following affords the giver no defense. Okay, for example, I'm just going to get this for 1 minute. Right, the fact that Y does not accept the gratification directly. Now, the fact that Y does not accept the gratification directly, but only indirectly, it's therefore sorry, just a message was coming through, whether Y makes use of an intermediary to satisfy the gratification. So if you didn't do it directly and you use somebody else in order to gain a gratification, it is no offense. The easiest way to think about this is like a mobster who doesn't want to get his hands dirty, Just let me see what the students no, there is audio. Please, students, just give me a thumbs up if that we have audio, please. Okay, thank you very much, students. So I'm just going to go back here. Thank you, Aliyah. So basically, think of thank you, Tembi. Think of, as I said, the mobster. They don't like to get their hands dirty. They generally send intermediaries. Thank you, students. Thanks, Dollar Fellow. And then that is one example of where you can say where the defense of directly comes, no defense of directly. Okay. Lebohang, if you're struggling, perhaps maybe you should just go in and go out. I do understand some of us have very weak connectivity issues, and I'm sorry for that. Perhaps when you do having issues and you know that there's a lecture, the best thing for students to do is to go to campus maybe. If you can, I do understand that many of us cannot go, but if you can, perhaps that maybe you should do that. To go on to the students, the next one is the fact that why the receiver why the receiver, although he gave the impression that he would accept the offer, in fact had no intention of doing what he had asked him to do. Now, why would this still be a crime, students? If you have been listening to me, it is why must accept the gratification in order to act in a certain way. Stated differently, they must accept the gratification as an inducement to act in a certain way, in a certain manner. This means you must accept the gratification with a certain aim or motive. The fact that she had no intention of eventually following through still constitutes an act of corruption. Okay, the next one, the fact that Y did not in actual fact subsequently perform the act which X had induced him to perform. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Say, for example, sorry, I'm receiving messages from the students. I'm going to concentrate on the lecture. Nina, Professor Mollema, and Advocate Kumenda, if you can just assist me with those queries, I'd really appreciate it. I'll be taking queries at the end of this presentation, students. So if you would just write down your questions, and if there's no answers coming through, just bear with us. We are kind of short-staffed. We've got lecturers doing more than one module, and therefore some days you will find us alone, and we can only take questions at the end of the presentation. So jot down the questions that you have, and you'll be attended to. Okay, so to go back now to the fact that Y did not in actual fact subsequently perform the act which X had induced her to perform. Say, for example, if Y had accepted the gratification, but the entire evil scheme. Oh, thank you, Mr. Rapalang. I see you are with us. I hope that is you. If that is you, thank you and welcome. He's one of our lecturers for CRW2601. Maybe he can assist as well. So the fact that, just say if Y had accepted the gratification, but the entire evil scheme was exposed, and Y was arrested by the police before she could fulfill her part of the agreement with X, Y is nevertheless guilty of the crime. The crime, remember students, I said, if you look at our elements, the crime is completed at the moment X consents to accepting the gratification. Remember that. You as students, as I said, you are going to be held to higher standard. You are not allowed to use your opinions here, not now. When you are given a set of facts, you use the set of facts that you are given and you apply it to the elements, and then you decide if the student is guilty or not guilty of a specific crime. I hope that makes sense. Then the fact that Y accepts the gratification, but that she in actual fact does not have the power or the right to do what X wishes her to do. Now, therefore, if X gives Y a gratification in the belief that Y will give her or X a driver's license to which she is not entitled, but it appears that it is not Y who must decide upon the granting of a driver's license, but Z. Remember now. So, for example, such a mistake will not afford X nor Y a defense. So, the person mistakenly believes, for example, they approach me, they want the driver's license, they give me money or they give me a promise or whatever inducement, but I am not in an authoritative position to give you such a driver's license. The fact that I am not in an authoritative position is no defense. The fact that that the person who approached me will be guilty, I who accepted will be guilty as well. Hope that makes sense, students. Okay. Then, now we are going, you remember we said that the element of inducement, and I told you I'll discuss the element of inducement with you. Y must accept the gratification in order to act in a certain manner. So they must accept it. This is now the receiver or the corruptee. They must accept the gratification. Stated differently, she or he must accept the gratification as an inducement to act in a certain manner. This means she must accept the gratification with a certain aim or motive. Please switch off your camera, students. You are disrupting the students that came here to learn. There are many of my students who came here to learn, who made sacrifices in terms of data, who made sacrifices in terms of going to places that have connections, strong connections. I plead with you who have got your cameras on to please don't be selfish, because my students came here to learn today. Cabello, please switch off your cameras. They came to hear and they came to listen to me for now. Later, we are going to listen to them. So the important part of this is the Sheikh case. We're going to go back. It's important. So in this crime of corruption, as I mentioned earlier, the Celebi case and then the Sheikh case. They must accept the gratification as an inducement to act in a certain manner. This means that they must accept the gratification with a certain aim or motive. Now, the legislature names a number of aims in considerable detail. However, once again, Professor Nina Mollema, Mr. Ramosa, and the lecturers before him, they've all abbreviated the version. They made it so easy for you to understand these aims. So for the purposes of this examination, it is sufficient that you know the abbreviated version. Okay. Let's look at the aims of inducement. Now, if you look at the aims of inducement, remember we said that the inducement must be given with the aim of making you act in a certain manner. Obviously, it must be an illegal manner. So if it amounts to illegal, dishonest, unauthorized, incomplete, or biased exercise of powers or duties, that will be corruption. If misuse or selling of information is corruption, abuse of a position of authority, the violation of a legal duty, or a breach of trust. Remember, this is the aims of inducement. I will give you examples of what these actions are a little later. So in order to, these acts are given in order to achieve an unjustified result, meaning you would not have been entitled to the gratification were it not for the inducement and the conduct, for example, right? So in order to act in a manner that amounts to any other or any improper inducement to do or not to do something. So that is an aim of the inducement. Here too, to understand what we mean, the Celebi case is very, very important as well. It has been broken down for you in detail in the study guide for your understanding. Then the unlawfulness issue, you remember, students? Am I breaking up, Tandiwe, or you are having a connectivity issue? Students, just give me a thumbs up if you are okay with me. Are we okay, students? Thank you, Sanjat. Please, please, just when I ask something, just answer on your chat. Thank you, Akshar. So to go, thanks, Zen. Thank you, Kulani. Right, let's go. Then now unlawfulness. Thanks, Dylan. The general meaning of Yamna, thank you. Unlawfulness is, the general meaning of unlawfulness is against the good morals or the legal convictions of the society. Yesterday as well, 2601 lecture, Professor Mollema and Mr. Ramosa spoke in detail about the convictions or the legal convictions of the community. For those of you who are not certain about what is good morals or legal convictions of the society, I'm going to be very worried. But in any event, it is what's in the best interests of the, it's what's in the best or moral or legal convictions of society as a whole. It implies that wise conduct must not be covered by a ground of justification. Now, what is a ground of justification is your defenses, as I mentioned earlier, to the element of unlawfulness. So, if a person acted under compulsion, what do I mean by under compulsion? Under compulsion means that the person was forced to act in a certain manner. That could possibly be a defense to the crime of corruption. Now, not only in South Africa, but all over the world, polices use traps. So if a police uses a trap, it is not an act unlawful. It is not an unlawful act. Either if he agrees to receive okay, sorry, let's go back. A person used as a police trap, does not act unlawfully either if he agrees to receive gratification from another person in order to trap that person into committing corruption. So remember, a police trap, and I'm sure many of you would know what a police trap are. As law students, you must have been glued to all the Law and Order, NCIS, which is one of my favorite series, CSIs. Now, those are a little bit overdone, but the concept is that they do use police traps in police series. So another example is if you receive gifts of a reasonable proportion by employees on occasions such as marriage or retirement. For those of you who are working, now for those of you who are working, you would know that you have to sign a declaration of interest if you get gifts or you receive monetary gifts, monetary incentives, etc. You have to declare this. Otherwise, it is corruption. For example, if you have to approach me and tell me that you want to pay off the bond on my house, and then I must give you the exam paper, that would be corruption. But in terms of employees and employers, if the employer comes to me and tells me to overlook, if, for example, an employer comes and says tells a disciplinary unit to overlook my conduct in the corruption, then he would also be guilty of corruption. So I hope that makes sense. And then a golden handshake. Now that is a different story. You must have heard the terminology golden handshake. Seeing that South Africa has been in the news for corrupt behavior so often, so a golden handshake is also not a justification to unlawfulness. Students, I hope that you're still okay with me. Corruption, now to go back, corruption relating to specific persons. Remember, I said that I'm going to give you some examples of that. Now, for example, the celebi judgment, corruption relating to public officials. As I said, the celebi judgment deals very eloquently with all the elements of the crimes of corruption. And very importantly here in that decision, it speaks about the element of inducement. Now, remember I spoke to you about inducement, and what did I tell you? That the elements of inducement, it depends on whether the receipt of the gratification is directed at procuring the recipient to act in one way or another. Oh, sorry, those of you who do not know, I should not presuppose that you know knowledge. I'm sorry about that. A golden handshake is where, for example, and this generally only happens in people that are already earning the big bucks. So just say a CEO in a company, what happens is there's some issues that happens within the company, whether it's a case of corruption or there is some fraudulent behaviors that's happening, and they want to get rid of you or they want to fire you. What they then do is that they tell you to go and they give you a handshake. Golden handshake can run into the millions and millions of rands. So they give you that money, but they're not taking into account that that person was also involved probably in the corrupt activities. I hope that makes sense. And I'm sorry if I presupposed information. That is not what I'm supposed to do. In any event, I hope I answered your question. To go back to corruption relating to the public officials, yeah, that's it. They pay you off. They pay you off. Okay. Then to go back to this celebi judgment, as I said, it depends on whether the recipient of the gratification is directed at procuring the recipient to act in one or more of the ways set out in the aims that we've discussed there. Okay. So as long as the aims of inducement are there and you act in a certain way, you will be guilty of the crime of corruption. Now, corruption in respect of agents. You remember when in the beginning, for those of you who are here, I said, and private individuals. I'm sorry, Mokwani, I do not know what it is that you do not follow. Perhaps ask your question. In the event of the agents and the private individuals, like for example, an example of corruption in the private sector. Say, for example, I work as a seller in Woolworths. Okay, so Woolworths is my company A, and I am charged with selling A's products. I'm charged with the duty of selling the products of Woolworths to wholesalers. Okay. Now, the wholesaler, which is Y, he works for another company, just say Fruit and Veg City. Okay, so I sell Woolworths products to the wholesaler who works for fruit and vegetable, fruit company or whatever. Now, in order to induce the person who is, say, B, working for the fruit and vegetable company to only buy my products from Woolworths, I offer them, say, family vacations. I offer them holidays. I offer them discounts on various products, but not discounts in a legal sense. I'm talking about discounts on holidays, on cars or whatever. That is, I'm committing a crime of corruption, and so is the person who accepts that crime, who accepts my conduct. Okay, so that is in the private sector. Corruption in relation to members of the legislative authority, that is your members of parliament and your cabinet members. Okay, corruption, is collusion in terms, okay, I can't see the entire question. I might come back to that a little later because my PowerPoint is up. So the legislative authority, it includes exerting any improper influence over the decision-making of any person performing his or her functions as a member of the legislative authority. This will be the same for judicial officers, the same for prosecuting authorities, and in relation to members of tenders. For those of you who want an example, for example, generally the government, if they have huge contracts, they send out a tender. Now, sometimes in order to influence the person that wants to submit the application for a tender would induce government officials to accept their tender. That would be a corrupt action. Now, corruption in relation to members of the sporting events. Now, for example, for those of you who were alive during the Hansi Cronje era and where cricket was played by, in my opinion, one of the best teams ever, Hansi Cronje was found guilty of corruption in terms of the fact that he was taking money to throw a game or to get a gratification. That issue, I think, broke many people, South African cricket players' hearts and fans, including myself. But it is where, for example, they betted money on the outcome of the sporting events, and they acted in such a way to ensure that they achieved their outcomes. One of the biggest incidences from that time is where he stood on the ball and he changed the shape of the ball so that the batsman could not properly hit fours and sixes. So that is corruption in relation to members of the sporting events. I hope that makes sense. Now, students, you can take your break. I know you must be tired of hearing me. I'm going to give you 1 minute. As I said in the beginning of this lecture, I need you awake. I need you alert. I need you out of those blankets. I need your head in the game. Go quickly, get yourself a cup of coffee. I'm giving you a minute. In the meantime, I'm going to just 1 minute. I'm going to go back to my presentation and mute and give you a minute. See you in a minute, students. Okay, Akshat, you asked a question about how do we draw the line between incentives and corruption. I'm not sure what you mean by that, by an incentive and a corruption. Remember, you need to look at the definition. I hope you can hear me, Akshat. You need to look at the definition as a whole. Now, an incentive is an inducement. That is one part of the element of the definition of corruption. So it is an incentive or an inducement is an element of corruption. So if there is that inducement and in that incentive, then there is corruption. I hope that answers your question, Akshat. Yes, Zamo, you'll be provided, whilst the students are taking a little bit break, you'll be provided with the slide and the video. How can one access the previous lecture, Luvoya? You're a bit late, my dear. Oh no, 2601, I take that back. My apologies. Professor Mollema has created a link that she's uploaded on the My Unisa website. And for those of you who were invited to the meeting yesterday, it will be on the Teams chat as well. Okay, Sufako, where can one access a Celebi case as is not in the reader? It is in your study guide, Sufako. The Celebi case and the Sheikh case is in your study guide. Prudence, shake hands for goodbye from your boss with money. I wish we could all do that. No, this is being recorded. I take that back. Don't hold it against me. Is collusion in terms of maybe industry-wide? Yes, fixing corruption. Absolutely. Collusion, remember, is fraudulent and corrupt behavior. That is why you will see some, as I mentioned in the previous lectures as well, there sometimes isn't a clear line on where one conduct or act falls into as opposed to the other. But we will try not to give you gray areas in the examinations. Okay, student, your minute is up. Can I just have a hands up that we can continue with the lecture, please, students? Are we here? Are we not here? Thanks, Daylene. Zeng, is that you telling me it's okay? Please switch off your cameras. Okay, so we're good to go. Let's go then. Thank you. We can continue. Thanks, Yumna. Thank you. Let me now just share my presentation again with you. Okay, it's not much more longer. I can see the time is going and I'm so sorry about that. That is why I said sometimes it's difficult for me to just put what I need you to understand in a short period of time, but I will give you half an hour after this in which to ask the questions. So please don't worry about that. I'm sorry about this, but the content needs to get through. Now the next crime. Let's continue. Yes, Sam, let's continue. So let me do this. The crime of extortion. Yes, let Lochonolo, you are in fact right. It doesn't matter if Gibbs didn't follow through. The fact that he did accept the offer is a crime of corruption. So to go now on to extortion, remember we just finished the crime of corruption. This is not going to take very long, students, because the content is not that much. So bear with me. Just give me about 10 more minutes and we shall be done. Okay, so extortion is the unlawful and intentional acquisition of a benefit from some other person by applying pressure to that person, which induces her to part with the benefit. Now, oh my word, what is this? Is people's cameras still on? That's not right. Please switch your cameras off. So the extortion is which page? Why are you shouting at me, Likhaiya? Go open your study guide. Open your study guide while you're talking to me. You'll find it directly after corruption. So extortion. Thank you, Amanda. The elements of this crime are the acquisition. As I said, your definition is important. Here you have to learn the definition. You can see it's a short definition. The definition also includes your elements. So let's quickly look at the elements of this crime, which is the acquisition. You're acquiring a benefit by applying pressure. By applying pressure on someone. Now, the importance of the extortion, and that's the reason I want to discuss this as well, is the causal link. The causal link between the pressure and the acquisition of a benefit. What do we mean by a causal link? That the acquisition of the benefit must have been because of the pressure that was exerted on the person. So, for example, if there is sexual favors involved and X pressurizes Y to, for example, sleep with them so that they can give Y a promotion. Now, the pressure is to sleep. The acquisition of the benefit is that he'll get sexual gratification. So the fact that if, for example, Y sleeps with X and there was no pressure, she was going to do it, that in itself is not an extortion. Okay, but if that's not the causal link. The causal link is X pressured Z to sleep with him in order to get the benefit of sexual favors. So that is important here. And if you do not understand, it is also defined in our study guide. And then you have the intention of unlawfulness and intention as well. The elements of those. Now, to go back, for those of you who do not know what the acquisition of the advantage is, the crime is not completed until the advantage has been handed over. Now, the difference between extortion and corruption is, the difference is, in corruption, you do not have to have the conclusion of the benefit or the acquisition or the inducement or the gratification. Okay, sorry, I think I'm making a mistake here. Wait, my terminology is not correct. It's the difference between corruption and extortion is that in extortion, the crime is not completed until the advantage has been handed over. So to take you back to our case of X pressurizing Y into sexual favors, if Y does not follow through with the pressure put on them by X, they would not be guilty of extortion. But in the crime of corruption, the mere fact that the offer was made would, for example, make the giver guilty of corruption. I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, it's just attempted extortion. Then causation, as I said, there must be a causal link between the threats or intimidation and X's acquisition of the advantage. The unlawfulness issue is the pressure or intimidation must have been exerted unlawfully. Now, if, for example, your employer comes to you and tells you, if you do not do your work, you face the possibility of a disciplinary hearing. That is not pressure or intimidation exerted in an unlawful manner. But if he comes to you and he tells you, if you do not, I'll let you get away with doing your work if you can buy me a car. And the person I buy my employer a car. That will be extortion. Hope that makes sense. And X must intend her words or conduct to operate as a threat. So there must be an intention on the part of the perpetrator that they must be seen as a threat to the person. For example, X must intend that their conduct must operate as a threat against Z. Okay, to go back to unlawfulness, we're almost there, students. Just shake it off a little bit. We're almost to the end here. Unlawfulness, the general meaning of unlawful is its absence or ground of justification. This is also, no, I went backwards, I'm sorry. Okay, this is also the same as unlawfulness here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to leave that and just know that it must not be unlawful pressure or intimidation. And then, students, let's ask some questions. I hope that has made sense. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back on camera. I'm going to do the brave thing and unmute everyone. And then I'm going to take the questions as it comes. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, Mohammed. My coffee and your lively lecture keeping. Thank you. That's brilliant. I'm glad I can help. Is it extortion or corruption for both? If I blackmail someone to gain future employment advantage by this is from Cabello. They say if I blackmail someone to gain future employment advantage by declaring to them that I would make known. Matthias, I know you dressed up for this lecture. But please switch your cameras off. It's really eating into the data of our students. I'm going to ask Nina or I'm going to ask Rapalang to take that while I'm going to then go to the hands to see which students or want to ask me a question. Okay, students, I'm going to unmute you. Let me go back. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to stop recording now, and then I'm going to take questions.